Hi, I'm George Fraser, CEO of Fivetran, and I'm joined today by Steve Jones, EVP of Data-Driven Business at Capgemini, where Steve helps companies make the promise of AI into a reality for their business, and by Bob Muglia. Bob has had a series of roles as a technology executive over the course of his career, including being the CEO of Snowflake during its formative years. And he now sits on boards, including Fivetran's board. All right, well, we're going to be talking about AI today. It's a hot topic, and we have a lot of content to cover. I would like to start with what are people doing with AI right now? Well, there's a lot of proof of concepts out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about AI, but what workloads are people doing in reality today?
I think one of the things is to sort of recognize that there's let's call it the historical AI, what people did with machine learning and deep learning, and that's been going on for years, forecasting, predictive analytics, those things are all out there. Then when you get into the Gen AI space and people are starting to use content and starting to use the idea of interrogation and natural language interrogation, the gap, as you say, the gap between POC and production is huge. So actually a lot of the time, people are doing fantastic POCs, great business opportunity, but not being able to transition it into production. That's one of the big things that sort of we've been focusing on a lot at Capgemini has been the fact that we're here in San Francisco, there's a huge number of companies will help you do a POC. A huge number of companies will help you pretend you have the data. A huge number of companies will therefore have a phenomenal demo. But if you look at, say, something about what does it take to actually put a Gen AI solution into a call center that can be trusted and deal directly with your customers, those solutions are going into production, but only with companies that really look at the quality of the data, the provisioning of the data, the availability, and ensuring the whole sort of digital business model is defined and constrained. But there really isn't an area that you can look at and say, there aren't examples of people putting things live into production. There's a large CPG company we work with where pretty much everything that they produce on e-commerce channels is generated using generative AI in 30 plus languages. There's people using generative AI to respond to customers from an acquisition perspective, from a sales perspective, retention perspective. We've got an example with one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies where if you speak Portuguese and it's 2 a.m. and you're being treated for breast cancer, you can speak to a digital avatar that'll give you a zero hallucination response and information about your treatment. Are you taking the right drugs? Are your symptoms what you would expect? It obviously won't do any diagnosis because that's not what it's there for and it's very closely bound. But you can do that with the current generation of AI. So the real piece is, the answer right now is people are doing everything with AI, but the people who are winning are the ones who are getting it into production. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces right now is the gap between a good demo and production has never been bigger. And one of the biggest things around that is, have you got the data you can trust to that solution that therefore you can trust its decisions? And for a lot of companies, they just do not have that.
Probably I'd say one of the most successful applications right now is for developers, and with things like copilots being able to help developers write code more efficiently. And a lot of companies are benefiting substantially from that and getting more productivity out of their developers. In general, generating content, summarization, transcription, and translation, those are more mature technologies. And what I think is next on the list, which has still not hit the maturity to the points that you're both making, is creating knowledge bases within companies and allowing these bots to be able to answer questions for either end users within the organization or customers. The potential for that is incredible, though, and I don't think we're very far away from solutions becoming reasonably mature. People are doing a lot with retrieval augmented generation, taking knowledge bases, using vectorization and vector databases to store that content, and taking that in conjunction with models to allow people to answer questions. But it's still a little early, and the tools are still very nascent on that. It's still very much a do-it-yourself environment, and I think that'll change substantially in the next 6 to 12 months.
One of the things we've noticed in our attempts to create an internal knowledge base search tool at Fivetran. And Fivetran, if you think about it, is a very good use case for this. As a support agent or a sales engineer or an account executive or a software engineer at Fivetran, you need to have mastery of this extreme breadth of information. We have 500 connectors. You might get asked a question by a customer about any one of them, and you might have to be able to be conversant in the internal details of the SAP HANA database or 499 other things. One of the things we found is that a lot of the work is really in just curating the data, is in getting it together and getting it ready for your language model. And the layer you put over top of that, DIY is not so bad. That layer can be relatively thin, and a lot of vendors are building a lot of tools to help accelerate that. But the long pole in the tent does seem to be collecting and curating the data that feeds the application. Would you agree with that, Steve?
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, the example, I actually wrote something this week in terms of Gen AI washing. I think RAG's a great technology, but there's never been a technology that's so easy to implement badly. Like I say, the demo's quite well for the first 2 seconds, but then when you get into the dimensionality of the data, because we're talking about how you add dimensionality to unstructured data that a lot of the time has not been written well, to be honest. A lot of support documents have been written by engineers, and that's not always the best quality sort of, it's more a thought pattern on a page sometimes. And understanding things like, for instance, with call centers. One of the pieces I was working with the client on, and the first thing we identified is they had phenomenal data for bad calls that didn't solve problems, because people document the excuses. People say, well, I wasn't able to fix it because of this. The ones where they could fix it, fixed, because they were KPI'd on call time. So the first thing we actually had to do with that was build something to do summarization, as you said, summarization of existing calls back to the call people to say, is this what you did? Which involved integrating with the code base, integrating with the things they used in their job, because otherwise all we had was fixed. And then we have to look at how do you actually represent that information to an LLM that it actually makes sense? Because there's a lot of hype in terms of inferring intelligence, but they don't have any. And the way you vectorize the information fundamentally tells the LLM how you want it to be presented. You can't just take a 20,000 word document and just say, I'm just going to chunk it up into bits. That's not what you need to do. You need to start looking at what's the thread within this that makes sense for this type of question. Like you take the HANA piece. If somebody phones up and is asking, I need to know how to connect it. Okay, there's probably something in there about connection and passwords and authentication and those pieces. If somebody's asking you, I've just got this data back from the HANA database and it says this, like this field, I don't understand what this field is. That might be in the same document, but if I just chunked it based on 500 words or whatever, or 500 characters, it wouldn't actually help me in any way, shape or form to answer the questions. I've actually got to sit back and think, how does this data represent the business in a way to the LLM? So now I can ask the question. So curation of the data, particularly unstructured data, is fundamentally a new skill that businesses have to learn to make LLMs not just incredibly creative hallucination engines.
One of the things we immediately noticed when we were working on this at Fivetran was that one of the really important data sources is our internal knowledge base, which is basically a wiki. And we're replicating that using Fivetran by connecting to the underlying CMS. And one of the things we immediately noticed that depending on how the information is structured in articles in that internal knowledge base, that can make the LLMs perform a lot better or worse.
Oh, yeah.
But where we went next with that was really interesting to me. Everyone's reaction was, well, it might be easier to just change the structure of our knowledge base a little bit to make it more LLM friendly, rather than try to build some layer of pre-processing. Let's just move the articles around a little bit, and that is a feedback loop that once you go live is going to happen. I think it's going to be really interesting to see to what degree does that start to happen. We start to build knowledge bases not for humans but for LLMs.
I think on code, you talked about code. Is how, one of the pieces we've worked a lot is how do you redefine your coding standards so an LLM can then come back and support the maintenance of it? Like the just putting the code in. No, actually now comments mean a lot more, because the comments are what described the LLM, and the old school problem we have with maintenance where somebody's fixed the bug but not the comment. The LLM is going to get confused by that. So it's those sorts of practices where you almost you put in place an audit where it says, right, do the comments in this file seem to describe the code that follows them? That's something an LLM is actually quite good at doing. So you can actually put that into your DevOps cycle now to say, as you're checking in the code, checking have you commented your code that matches the code you just changed? Answer, no. Well, can you go and change the comment, please? That's the sort of practice you're going to have to put in place to do this moving forwards, because otherwise the LLM is going to start trusting the comment more or trusting the code more, and you're going to end up with a significant problem of it hallucinating what your code base actually does.
I mean, it's really this idea that people together with machines have to be able to work together in a way that each understand each other. And one of the things about, you talk about people making changes, I think as time goes on and the models get better, they'll be able to actually generate more what you could think of as knowledge graphs from data that we have, whether it's documents or different kinds of systems, beginning to really understand the structure of these things. And that's one of the areas where we still have immaturity, is the ability to take the structure of human-generated information and to put that in a format and transcribe that into a format that the models can really understand. And I think knowledge graphs are going to play a very key role in that. And companies will more and more begin to think about how they establish their business process, their business rules in the forms of knowledge graphs that can be understood by both people and by machines.
You love knowledge graphs, Bob.
I do. I'm a fan of
You
them.
can't have a conversation with Bob more than 15 minutes without knowledge graphs coming up. Can you try to, for someone who's not familiar, give what is the tip of the iceberg? What's a knowledge graph? How is it different than, say, a folder filled with documents or a table with rows and columns?
Well, a folder filled with documents essentially it has the foundation of a knowledge graph in it. When people create a document, they create structure to it, and that structure has meaning. It has a lot of meaning. You look at a table, take a table within a document. That is not necessarily just straight rows and columns. They often have subcolumns and things like that, all of which have meaning that we have learned to infer over time. How do you translate that into a format that the machines can understand? And the way to do this is to essentially be able to create a structure that reflects what the human would understand, and that turns out to be a knowledge graph. And a knowledge graph is simply a digital representation of human-created knowledge that can be understood by a machine. And we're still at the point where that is quite nascent in technology, but I think it's going to become much more important over the next couple of years.
Nascent is a good word in this context. This is early days for this new wave of AIs powered by giant matrix multiplications, let's say. And there's a lot of unknowns. How does an organization prepare for the unknown?
If you're going to say in future 50% of our decisions are going to be AI enabled, either supported or directly made by AI, then the first question is, okay, do we have a representation of our business in a digital form that could make that happen? Because even if the answer's, it's going to take 5 years to get there, it's going to take 7 years to get there, or 2 years to get there, then that is the precursor to it, is do we have a digital representation of our business? And one of the biggest problems I'd say right now in most organizations, as Bob just said in terms of the documents, is you can apply that to everything. You apply that to the decisions. Is there a digital description of the decisions and the decision instruction in the organization? No, it's embedded within the organizational hierarchy and cherished beliefs and cultural social norms. Well, therefore, I can't rely on an AI to make a decision. So I think one of the biggest things that businesses need to look at is this isn't a technology change. I was speaking to the head of AI of one of our largest financial services clients the other week, and they actually made a great point, which is they've been doing it for a while. And they're like, it's an organizational change for us. This is going to change the organization more than it changes technology. The technology is going to keep evolving. It's going every week there's a new model, every day there's a new variation and a new piece. But what's really changing is the idea that the business is going to delegate authority for decisions to AI, and not like they've ever done before. Therefore, if they don't have that digital description of their business, then they're going to lose. And I think that's the one thing I can predict is it really is a question is if one company has a digital description and can rely on AI to really make decisions and can do forecasting and simulation ahead of the market, they're going to win against somebody who can't. And I think it's that sort of retail mall versus Amazon moment of we're going to get to a stage where some businesses and sectors can manage themselves digitally and trust AI to make decisions and others can't, and it will not be a fair competition. So I think that's the thing right now is, as a business, is Are you in control of your operational reality? Do you have a digital definition of your business?
But nobody really does right now. Really, nobody does.
I agree.
Because all that information is scattered all over the place. It's in documents, it's in people's heads. A lot of it is in code embedded within applications, many of which you don't even own. They're SaaS applications that you have a subscription to. And the interesting thing is, how do you actually create that digital description, which to me is a knowledge graph, by the way. When you say digital description, I'll say knowledge graph. And I think they're basically the same thing.
Can I say hypergraph?
And it's one way. And I think one of the really interesting things is, and I've learned this over the last few years, is people are not very good at being able to take complex business processes and creating those digital descriptions. And I do think this is where models are going to help. They're going to help to curate that, but it's going to require this combination of models being able to pull information out of whatever sources exist, being curated by people and validated by people to ensure that the business process is accurately reflected in the digital description. Because if it's not accurately reflected, the model can't possibly make the right decisions.
We believe, particularly in tech, business processes are real. Right? And the actual thing is, when you start modeling businesses, they work much more as a collaborative network than they do as a business process. Right? But we've encoded those business processes into applications. My favorite one, I'm sure if I've read, the idea that lead to cash is real. Right? There's a sales team and there's a finance team, and they hate each other for very good reasons. Finance is there to control risk and to ensure that things don't go, and the sales team want to sell anything they can. But the dynamic of that collaboration, we encode within lead to cash, and then we pretend when we've got data problems and issues, we go, oh, it's a business process issue. I actually think, to your point of models, we're going to find that the models start learning that those business processes aren't real. It's the collaborations and the organizational networks, which is the graph, that actually drive the business and its operations rather than what we've encoded in those transactional systems. And that's all about that data view and that collaborative view of the organization. And most people today, that just lives in Excel spreadsheets and emails. And that's a massive problem.
So there are a lot of vendors who are trying to help people tackle these problems. But AI is a paradigm shift, and sometimes paradigm shifts blow up existing vendors. What do we think is going to happen? Are the existing vendors going to adapt and encompass these workloads, or is this going to turn the apple cart over and someone else is going to come along who's a data platform based on knowledge graphs or whatever it might be that is going to serve these new workloads?
Well, so far, AI has very much benefited the existing vendors. They've been able to incorporate technology into their existing products and enhance them. I would predict that when you think about the platforms, and to me, there are 5 major data platforms, Snowflake and Databricks, plus the 3 cloud vendors, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. And I think that all of them are focused on AI and incorporating AI deeply into their platform. And I think it's the correct way to do it, because everybody is moving to a common form of data lake that'll be able to store all kinds of data, structured, semi-structured, and unstructured or complex data. The tools and facilities are being built around these platforms. And I think that's the way the world is going to go. So I don't predict that there's going to be upheaval in the platform vendors. I do predict that there's major changes in terms of what those platforms provide, particularly with new AI facilities.
All of these platform vendors today deal with post-transactional data. They all deal with data that I use the phrase, it's dead data, right? It's finished, it's there, we curate it, we provide the view that it's great for learning in those areas. But for decisioning, for operational speed pieces, that's the remit of the application vendors. And historically, the entire dynamic of the market has been, we all accept that applications produce rubbish data, and then the data platform vendors spend a huge amount of time cleaning it up. We use an expression like data is the new oil. And part of that is the idea that data needs refinement before you can possibly trust it. Well, if I've got an AI that's now acting as my procurement manager with one of my suppliers, I can't wait 24 hours. I can't wait for all of that cleaning. So I actually think if you're looking at an area where there's going to be the most disruption, and where, therefore, I think we're going to get the contention between players in the market, if I'm running an application world and I want to be data-driven and I want to use AI to make decisions, that means my application needs to be led by data. Right now, that's not what happens with applications. Applications are led by transaction, are led by process, and then output a bunch of poor quality data. Well, if you're saying, no, AI drives those decisions, that gives a very interesting dynamic between the data platform vendors who've never gone there and the application vendors who've never gone there. But that's where this new world lives, for me, is actually in front of the current applications. If AI makes decisions in operations, that's the shift. So I agree. I don't think it's going to be a massive shift on the back end. But I do think when you start saying AI goes into operations and makes operational decisions, we're going to change the way we build applications. And that is a massive switch.
That's interesting. And that might be more of a change for the application vendors rather than the data platform vendors, because they're going to be having to do some kind of federated something to gather context from all of these other places.
They'll have to get the context from other places, and also they'll have to concentrate on data accuracy. It won't be about data quality. Data quality is what we do because the data wasn't accurate. But if an application vendor wants to say, well, I'm going to lead with AI and data, great. But that means the data has to be accurate. And right now, that's not a common thing within the application space.
I completely agree with you that the idea that data needs to be refined is true, but it should not be your first choice.
Yes, exactly.
We should fight against that.
Yes.
We go and try to fix your Salesforce configuration. Go and try to simplify your SAP implementation so that the data is more accurate to begin with. There will be many benefits now and in the future, not just that your data engineers don't have to spend all their time,
papering over mistakes,
regrouping opportunity channels.
Yeah, exactly.
But it will be much easier to build all kinds of other workflows that you haven't even anticipated yet.
Yeah, exactly. And historically in data, we've accepted that applications produce poor data. We've always said, it's the biggest lie I used to say, biggest lie in data is, we'll fix it at source. Because we never did, because we didn't have the authority. But now you're starting to see where the business side, which is the other side of the application, as it were, is going, no, I need to be able to rely on AI. I think that mentality change and the need, therefore, to be bringing in context into operations changes the dynamic for the data platforms, but also more significantly changes the data dynamic of applications.
So historically, the data platforms have been used a lot for reporting. That was the number one use case, and probably still is today if we went and annotated everyone's SQL queries for what ultimately is this feeding. That more and more workloads are running on top of these systems, including the ones we've been talking about. What are the implications for the major data platforms in terms of how do they need to change in order to do things other than reporting, in order to do all these new workloads?
Well, I think one of the key things is going to be to continue to focus on the governance of these environments, because more and more as the platforms become intelligent applications are built on top of that are part of the business process and are beginning to make business decisions directly. Having the governance pieces in place so that only the data that should be accessible is accessible at the right time. So those are some of the short-term changes I think you'll see, is a lot of focus on ensuring that these things are coherent and secure, because you're going to be putting almost all of your data in a central place and using it to now make a much broader set of business decisions directly from it, because AI will do it directly.
Yeah, I think the other piece as well is the reporting is a human speed, post-transactional, like 24 hours, 48, whatever. People are comfortable with the delay. The biggest sort of change on that data platform side, the biggest thing that people have to get away from when they think about reporting, when you're moving towards AI, is that the data availability speed needs to fundamentally change. You're not, Bob needs a report on his desk tomorrow morning. No, this AI is running 24/7. It's changing and making the recommendations. We are monitoring it 24/7. We are looking at those things and this information is streaming through. That sort of evolution of change of pace. And the other piece I would say, a big one, is the biggest thing between reporting and sort of more large-scale data is the shift away from the mindset that there is a magic schema. There is governance is incredibly important, but there is no magic schema that describes your business. And I still see people today with data lakes, with these modern data platforms, still trying to say that governance is we're going to have an enterprise data model and everybody must comply to an enterprise data model. Number one, it never ever works and it never ever will. But it's also a massive sort of drag on AI efforts, because I've never met a data scientist in my entire career who ever worried about one of those things. And number two, these new models, when you're talking about how they consume data in those pieces, they don't care about your EDM either. So the biggest piece is, number one, you've got to change your mindset on speed. And number two is you've got to recognize governance means representing the operational accuracy of the business, not representing arbitrary quality metrics of things like completeness. Yes, great, that is not complete. Well, we've got to deal with it. Is it accurate within its context? It is accurate, but I'd really like to have these extra 4 fields. Good for you. I don't care. I think that's the mentality of moving from reporting to AI, is accuracy and the reflection of your reality should be the measure. A lot of the time in reporting, it's been, does the field in the report at the end have data in it and look good? And that's not the same governance that we need between traditional reporting and governing for AI and operations.
From your lips to God's ears. I mean, I think I have seen so many companies spend way too much time trying to create that perfect schema that has one table for every concept, and it just, it cannot be done. The right approach is to ask, what are the problems that we are trying to solve this year? And then work backwards from those. What is the schema that we need to support those? And it's going to evolve every year. There's never going to be some promised land of, I have the perfect dimensional schema where everything has been deduplicated and qualityified and, God.
And as Bob said, is it's not the same in different areas of the business as well. When you talk about knowledge graphs, part of the point of the power of those is the sales team. I mean, one of my favorite examples, working once with a very large brewer, was they tried for literally 2.5 years to create a unified schema for all of this stuff. And the biggest area they had was customer, and I was an MDM guy back then. And they tried to do it. And then first question I asked was, okay, how do you sell in these different regions? And the answer was, well, in North America and Europe, they sell to big box retailers and wholesalers and things like that. Great. What's your ability to cross-sell and upsell? 0. They're in different continents. How on earth would we do that? Right. What do you sell in South America? Oh, we do a lot to small-scale retailers, mom and pops. We actually have a direct-to-consumer business in these. Like, why on earth did you spend 2.5 years trying to create a standard model for something that your business goes, yeah, we don't work like that? Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is representing the fact that the business needs to reflect the business, and in different areas of the business, they have a different view on the data. That is not a mistake, and that's often with reporting mentality. It's viewed as a mistake to be fixed, rather than recognizing the business doesn't work like a perfect data model.
But that comes back to the digital description that you described earlier, the knowledge graph, the idea that different parts of the business, different divisions, different groups within them do things differently, and that needs to be reflected. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's really important is time, because things change over time. And so the way a business worked last year could be quite different than the way it works this year, and that's reflected in the data. And without that understanding of the change in the way the business process worked, the data is almost garbage. Yeah. You can't really analyze it correctly. So having all of that understood is critical. And more what we'll need to do is have those things digitally described for the AI to be able to make the correct decisions.
Yeah, we made a big investment years ago in making history mode ubiquitously available in Fivetran for this reason. It's not enough just to know, what is true today. You need to know what is true in the past. And sometimes you need to know, what did I think was true 2 years ago from the point of view of 1 year ago?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I mean, I can't, these AIs, history is, maybe, data and value, the history of change of data is one of the most valuable things that a business has, because that tells them how they got from A to B and how these things evolved and changed. It's what AI models will need when you do deep learning on your own data. It's the change. That's really what you're trying to do. And when you look at, say, applying Gen AI, instead of doing forecasting, doing simulation, one of the most brilliant things from last year that Google did on the DeepMind piece was they did a simulation using Gen AI of weather. Everybody, if you'd gone 10 years ago and said, we're going to do a simulation of weather for the planet, people have gone, that's insane. Jensen today was talking, we can do simulations down to a 1 kilometer type area of weather forecasting. That's because you've got 40 years of history of weather data. Again, back to the point, if you've got that history, you're talking about Fivetran, you've got it baked in, this idea of history of change, and one of your competition doesn't, If you've got 5, 10, 15 years of history and you're able to say, these are the ways that things impacted and changed, and I can run an AI that can automate that and therefore make a forecast 24 hours ahead of my competition, I'm going to beat my competition. It will be as simple as that. So yeah, history of change is probably the most valuable thing that companies should be constructing right now, if they haven't already started, and recognizing what the value of that is going to be in terms of not just managing the business, and like you say, BCP, it's incredibly important, but that's going to be your foundation of how you start changing the way you do management into the future and decisioning, because that's how you're going to be actually forecasting the future based on that history of change. And I think that's a huge shift over our traditional Excel and 3% forecast target style stuff.
You know, you mentioned a moment ago a company having 40 years of history in a data set. And when you have 40 years of history, that means your data set is going to outlive your tools. There's going to be many tools are going to come and go, and you are going to have that same data set. And this creates a problem. You can end up with a long series of very painful migrations. One thing people are talking about a lot right now as a potential solution to this problem and other problems is data lakes. Do you think data lakes have value here, and what does that term mean to you?
The whole architecture of data lake, the basic principle is I have a separation of compute and storage. Now, the compute side has multiple variations, but we're talking about having a archival standard for data availability. And to me, that's the foundation of a lake, is just that idea that I've stored everything and every change. I will compress it. So if it's something where it's literally just a stock ticker of going every half a second, saying what the stock price is, you don't store every one, you just store the changes. But it's that mentality of I've got an archival history of change, and then on top of that, I'm provisioning it for purpose. And the purpose will change, the usage will change, the technologies will change, but it's all going to be based on the idea of I've got a stored history of change in my organization.
We've seen that pattern sometimes at large companies at Fivetran, where in DIY data pipelines, they'll record the same data over and over and over and over. And so they'll say, I have a petabyte of data, but really they have a terabyte of data 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't do it, if you don't do change data capture, that can be really problematic. I think the one real key thing for data lakes is the fact that it's moving to an open format that allows a choice of vendor tool around it. We're in a little bit of a weird situation right now because we have two formats that are competing with each other, Delta and Iceberg. It looks like
and 6 or 7 catalogs.
And then the catalogs are all different. It looks like there will be some convergence on this in the not too distant future. Iceberg seems to be gaining a fair amount of traction. And by having a common open format, which allows, regardless of who owns the catalog, what vendors in the catalog, that different vendor solutions can be built on top, whether it's data quality, data warehousing, AI tools, machine learning, whatever, how those things can be combined. I think that's a very, very major change that is now possible because the technology has evolved sufficiently, and we have some open formats that can be used by multiple vendors.
Right. Well, I said earlier that it's folly to make predictions in a time of so many unknowns, but let's do it anyway.
Why not?
Let's all make some near-term predictions of what's going to happen, let's say, in the next year. I'll start. My prediction I'll put out there is I think that these AI workloads are going to be more like business intelligence than like application development. I think the platform vendors are creating some great building blocks, and companies are going to find a lot of success in assembling those building blocks together along with a very curated view of their own data in order to create great internal tools.
I think that we'll see in the next 12 months or so the idea of creating knowledge bases within companies, both for their customers and for their internal users, and having a AI bot be able to answer questions for people. I think that's going to become mainstream in the next year, and that's a very big technology shift if you think about it, because a whole lot of what we do is look for information, and having systems to be able to do that for us is going to be a big change.
Yeah, I think if I was going to I'll make two predictions just to break the rules and be wrong twice. The first one I'll say is I think that purpose-specific models for enterprises are going to beat out big general models. And that includes purpose specific. I mean, taking general models and almost lobotomizing them for purpose, like restricting them. There won't be one model that knows everything. There's going to be purpose specific, and the orchestration of that is going to be the way that enterprises really scale this up, because that's how you scale people, to be honest. And the second thing, I think, the thing you said in terms of the development, whether it's like BI, whether it's like application development, I don't think it's going to be, I'll actually challenge you, we can have a competitive prediction. I think it's going to be like something new. I think it's because I think that it's like when people started building for the internet over building client server. I think there's a shift that requires people to know how to build an application that is data driven, that has two sets of cultures that need to be combined. Whether it looks slightly more like a sort of a business intelligence or slightly more an application, I think it's going to absolutely have that mentality. So some of the ones I've been working on in the last year or so, the teams are very blended between people who understand what operations means and people who understand what data means. And I think that's what we're going to see in that space. And I think we're going to see the multi-model, collaborative model type piece and the sort of knowledge graph and hypergraph description around that. And we're going to see this creation of a new sort of skill set, which is people who understand data, but understand this data within the scope of an operational decision. And I think those two skill sets are relatively rare right now. So if I was starting out, that's probably what I'd be focusing on as a career.
Well, thank you both for joining me for this fascinating conversation. And I think we can all agree that we're all excited about participating in the evolution of this whole system.
A lot of change happening. A lot of positive things can be done with this.